Good afternoon folks, welcome to Visordown. My name's Toad and today we are in Nice in France for the launch of the new Ducati XDiavel V4. The first of the V4 generation XDiavels. I literally rode the normal Diavel V4 a little bit earlier on last year, so it was at the tail end of last year, and that was my first taste of it in V4 form. I was a big fan of the V2, the old 1260 motor was an absolute gem. I loved it in pretty much every bike it was in. But it changed to the V4, and do you know what? It did win my heart over with that engine character, that rich spread of torque, and also the punchy top end that you get from that Granturismo V4 engine. But they haven't just left it alone, they've fettled it and they've played with it, and this is the latest edition of it. And we've just ridden it here in Nice, and it's quite ironic that on the day before we rode it, we were sat in the press conference, and as we were sat in the press conference for the Diavel, there was a new Pope elected, which I thought was rather funny. But what have we got? Well, we've got basically a whole new bike. So the chassis, the frame, the engine obviously is all new, the suspension is all new, the styling has been absolutely gone over, and the electronics have been boosted as well. It's also the first Ducati that you can get that you won't be able to get in the traditional Ducati red colour. You can only get it in this, I think it's called burnt red colour that they've got, and there is another option as well, which is a black option. But it's the first Ducati that is not available in Ducati's traditional red, which is quite a big deal. And I have got to say, this Ducati red that it is in is an absolutely stunning colour. So what is it? Well, this is the base bike, which is 25,995 for the XDiavel in red. If you want the black, it's an extra couple of £100, takes it up to 26,260 odd pounds. Obviously the big news is the engine, that Granturismo V4 that's down there. It's pumping out 168 horsepower, I think it is, and it's got 126 Newton meters of torque, so it is an absolutely torquey motor. But what was really evident when we were in the press conference yesterday is that little torque curve that you've got, because it's really punchy at the bottom, and then as you get into the mid-range where there'd normally be a little bit of a flat spot, there was actually a little bit of a peak in the mid-range, and then it sort of got higher and higher as it went up. So right where there'd normally be a flat spot on an engine such as this bike has got a little peak just to give it a little bit more punch in the middle, which was great. You've obviously got the counter-rotating crank, which really helps the handling of the thing, and it has got the extended rear cylinder deactivation. So when you're riding around town, the rear bank of cylinders will drop off at low speed and you'll just be riding a two-cylinder effectively. And then as you get back at the speed, all four cylinders will come on song and you will get the full power again. We've got a Ducati quick shifter as standard, which is the latest gen quick shifter, which is up, down, and it lets you shift on a partially open or partially closed throttle. And we've got a power launch system as well, which we didn't get to try on the launch day, which would have been a hell of a lot of fun, but I reckon it probably takes a little bit of a toll on the clutch, which was why we didn't have a play with it. You've got 16,000 kilometre main valve check on this one, and the XDiavel is the only one of the Diavel range that gets that nice gloss finished engine. You've got 50mm Marzocchi forks at the front, which are fully adjustable. You've got Marzocchi rear shock absorber as well, which is fully adjustable. Braking system, we've got Brembo style Emma calipers, which are biting down on absolutely humongous 300mm discs at the back, and you've got a dual piston sliding Brembo caliper at the rear as well, so you're never really going to be wanting for any more braking power on a bike such as this. The other big change between this and the standard Diavel V4 though is the riding position, because as you can see, this bike gets forward controls, whereas the Diavel V4 as standard comes with mid-set controls. The forward controls are adjustable as they are, plus or minus 20mm, but you can buy a mid-set control kit as well, which you can get the dealer to fit for you if you want to go for the mid-sets. If you go for the forward controls, you're going to have maximum 39 degrees of lean angle, which we were testing quite a lot today because these pegs have been decked out quite a bit. If you go for the mid-sets, you gain a couple of degrees of lean angle, so you'll be getting 41 degrees of lean angle on that one. Another change over and above the previous XDiavel is this has now got 5mm for more travel at the rear end of the bike to make it a bit more composed, and also the rear shock settings have been completely revised on that one. We've got a bigger rider seat, so it's plusher, so it's got more foam, and we've got a larger pillion seat with a little bit more foam, but it's much more expansive, so a bit better for a pillion, because these are bikes that, despite the look of them, people do like to get the bags and the top box on the back and go for a tour on them. So that's still very much something that you can do on this one. The bars have also changed as well while I'm talking about the ergonomics and the comfort of the thing. So slightly lower, slightly further back to the rider. I think it's about 20 mil lower and about 14 mil further back towards the rider. So all in all, it's a very relaxed and very comfortable riding position with that feet forward position that it's got. Total wet weight, but without fuel, is 226 kg. So that is 6k down on the old XDiavel S and 4kg down on the previous standard XDiavel. And as all of the Ducatis that you can get in the sort of sporty end of the range, it's got the full suite of IMU control, cornering ABS, traction control, and all of that good stuff. So what have we done today? We have done, I think we've done around 240 kilometers on the bikes. It started off here in Nice, glorious sunshine, rode up north of Grasse and went up some reservoirs, did a big old loop, and then stopped off for lunch halfway and then came back down almost the same way that we went up, but including the photo runs and a little free ride section where there was a closed road that we could just go and hooligan up and down for half an hour. I think we've totaled about 220, 230 kilometers. After all that time, compared to the previous XDiavel, because that's what I'm benchmarking this against, because it's the latest generation of that, the biggest change that you notice really is that V4 engine. It's changed the character of it, it's changed how aggressive the engine is, and it's changed the rideability and the performance of the bike massively. It is a much more potent motor. It doesn't have that booming V-twin quality that the old 1260 motor had, which I really did enjoy. I fell in love with that when I rode a Multistrada 1260S from Coventry to World Ducati Week. Thought it was just the absolute best engine in the world at that time. This hasn't got the same character, but it is basically better in every single way in terms of economy, performance, rideability. The electronics are much better. It's just overall it is a much more compact, much more light and much more usable unit when you put it in a bike just like this. I've got to say as well, on the handling front, I noticed that the steering is super light. Whether or not you're just riding slowly through town or manual handling the bike, the steering is featherweight. And I didn't notice that with the old XDiavel that I rode a couple of years ago. It just feels almost like it's got power steering. That's not to say that it's not composed when you're cornering. It's super, super stable, but that's all thanks to the configuration of the bike and the geometry of it. But just around town, it's such an easy little bike. When we left the hotel, we had about 20 minutes of sort of town riding through the town of Grasse, which was really, really busy. It was sort of rush hour when we hit it. So we were sort of threading our way through traffic, and that was just great because you've got a really low seat. I'm flat foot on the floor, and there aren't many bikes that I can say I'm flat foot on. And the steering is just so light, and you just put it in the urban mode and everything was sort of softened off and you could just sort of zip through traffic with ease. It was absolutely brilliant. Another thing that I noticed when we were riding around town, because there's a hell of a lot of speed bumps in this part of the world, is how much more compliant the rear end of it is. When you go over potholes and bumps and speed bumps and stuff, it used to be on the old XDiavel 1260, it was very jarring and it sent a sort of shockwave right the way up your spine that seemed to come out through the top of your head. That has totally been diminished. It is much softer at the rear end on those sort of bumps, but without compromising any of the high-speed composure that you get when you're in a fast corner and you want a really stable and planted base beneath you. So they've given it that extra comfort, but they haven't taken anything away from the performance, the agility or the handling of the bike, which personally I think is absolutely brilliant. Overall, when we got out of town, we got up into the mountains here and there are some beautiful roads. I mean, Ducati picked a route which really painted the bike in its best light, and that was sort of fast sweeping corners, mountain passes. You know, there wasn't much tight and nadgery stuff on it, and that's really where this bike came into its own, because you can carry such a lot of corner speed. I mean, yeah, I was decking the pegs down today on the road ride, but you had to really push the bike into a corner to get those pegs decked down. There's a lot of lean angle on offer, and you really have to push past to get the pegs ground down. But then once you're out of the corner, you just stand the bike up and you've got that humongous 240 section rear tyre there, which you can just use all of the power to drive you out of the corner, and it will just hurtle you at the next corner with amazing ability. It is super, super quick. I mean, these things were always fast when they had the 1260 motor in them, but they've put the V4 in it now, and it just feels even quicker. It's really very eye-opening on that respect. A big mention's got to go to the brakes, because today on the road riding it, it didn't feel like you were ever going to be able to outbrake yourself on this thing. You've got those massive 330mm discs. They're about as big as you can get, I'm pretty sure, from Brembo, backed up with Stylema calipers, and the pad compounds that Ducati have selected are absolutely pitch perfect for the bike, because you've got a really nice initial bite, but then you don't lose any of that feel as you get further into the meat of the lever. It's just a beautiful feel all the way through the brake lever. The back brake as well has got a huge disc and a massive 2-piston Brembo caliper on it, which you would normally see on the front wheel of some other bikes. But there is also loads of power in the back brake, and on a bike like this, that's really important, because when we were riding it up in the mountains, the only time that it started to come unstuck, or you start to feel like it was going out of its comfort zone, was if we'd got really tight technical hairpins. But because of its length, what you do then is you get on the back brake to help sort of tighten make the corner a little bit tighter. But it was great to have such a powerful, strong back brake that also had good feel there. The cornering ABS as well is, you know, this is all a trickle down of technology from the Panigale and the Street Fighter V4, and it's a very similar system in the way that it actuates and the way that it feels when you can feel the ABS triggering. It doesn't bleed all the juice out the lever. You've still got a nice lever there that you can get back into once the ABS has done its things and straightened everything out. But with such a big rear tyre and loads of grip and such planted suspension, really the only time that I felt the ABS triggering was in this afternoon when we had a torrential rain shower on the way back to the hotel here. That was really the only time that I felt the ABS triggering. These Diavel Rosso Corsa 3s that Ducati have fitted to the bike, and I think that must be the biggest Diavel Rosso Corsa 3 ever made, give the bike such phenomenal grip, phenomenal feel, and it just turns so nicely on them, and that's probably partly the reason why it does feel so light steering at the front end of the bike. As I just mentioned the ABS, I'm going to move on to the traction control system of the bike. There was only really a couple of things that I noticed about the traction control system that I would say were possibly a negative, and that was very occasionally if the system would trigger, and I was riding in touring mode and sport mode for most of the day. I was sort of flicking between those two modes when it was dry at least. The only negative point that I'll say with the traction control system is occasionally when you're riding in sport and touring mode, if the system was triggered, you'd still be on the gas and there would be quite a big pause before it would allow the bike to start accelerating again. So it would hold the power back for a little bit longer than I wanted, because you could feel that there was grip there and you could feel that the bike was, you know, back where it needed to be to make progress, but there would still be a little bit of a delay. But I mean, there are a lot of bikes that do that. That is quite a common trait with traction control systems, and you know, you can sort of turn it all down if you want to. You've got that brilliant suite of electronics all locked away in that lovely new TFT, so you can turn it down as you want and just ride around the traction control just normally if you want to. But it was just the only real thing that I noticed. Everything else, the wheelie control, the ABS, it all works wonderfully, and you can turn the wheelie control down and get a bit more lift over crests, and believe you, this thing will wheelie. I've seen people clutching it up on this thing earlier on today, and it does wheelie very easily if you know how to do it. But for me, it was little power wheelies over some crests, but the wheelie control controlled it all beautifully, so I was very happy to have the electronic support from that. I did also just mention the TFT, and I was riding the Panigale V4S at Donington the other day, back to back with the Street Fighter V4S, and it's the same TFT that they've got fitted on both of those bikes, but it just fits this bike so well because it's just nestled right between the handlebars with that little fly screen over the top of it. It just looks brilliant, and because it's so big, it's so nicely laid out, you're never looking for any information, you're never having to search the dash looking for the little bit of information that you need. It's all just there, clearly laid out in front of you, and you've got all the connectivity that you need as well, which is absolutely brilliant. This afternoon, when we were riding back to the hotel, I also got a chance to test her out in rain mode, because it was biblical rain. I'm talking proper heavy rain. But I was so surprised at how accessible that made the bike feel, because it cuts the power down to 115 bhp. It gives you probably one of the softest throttle maps that I've ever felt, and the traction control is just jacked up through the roof. So any spin whatsoever from the rear wheel and it's just going to cut the power for you, which is exactly what you want in that scenario. And it just made it feel really very accessible. It was very easy to ride. The suspension's not overly jarring. It's got a nice soft composure to it on the road, so you get a little bit of dive on the forks and a little bit of squat under acceleration. And when you're riding in the wet, that's kind of what you want. So it was very interesting to see, because we were going through very changeable weather this afternoon. So 1 minute it'd be blazing sunshine, dry roads, and you'd be in sport or touring mode, just absolutely pressing on and scraping pegs. And go around the next corner and you'd ride into a sheet of rain, and you'd get it back into rain mode. But what's so good is the new switch gear that Ducati have put on it. Very easy to use. It's not quite as good as the 5-way joystick that the Panigale V2 and the Street Fighter V2 get, but it is much better than the old system. So I like that, and you can just flick through the menu on the fly without having to glance down at the dash too much, which is all good from my side. So I've got to talk about the comfort, because earlier on I did mention that these, a lot of people like to ride these things long distances. People do see them as a cruiser come tourer. That's just been improved massively. It's helped hugely because that new rear shock absorber setting in the revised suspension is making it much more compliant over bumps. But the seat is also a nicer place to be. Sometimes these feet forward sort of cruiser style bikes, they can make you feel a little bit too overstretched and you start to get a bit of pain in the small of your back. But actually, even for me as a smaller rider at 5'7", I found this one perfectly comfortable for a long day in the saddle, which was absolutely great. The seat comfort's good, the ergonomics feel about right, and unlike the previous generation XDiavel, which I would be at full extension if I was on full lock turning the bike, and it make it a bit tricky to hold the clutch in, this one is much better for that because the bars have just come back to you and they're a little bit lower. So turning this one round in the road was a little bit easier thanks to not being at full extension on my arms, which was all good. Vibration wise, it's all very good. There was some slight tingles when you're right at the top of the rev range, but you're never going to be there when you're cruising on the motorway, so it's not really an issue. It was only when we were hammering along the B roads and you get up near the rev limiter that you'd start to feel a tingle come through the bars. When we backed it off on the highway earlier on, we were doing about 75, 80 miles an hour on cruise control. There was absolutely no vibes whatsoever, so that was all good. Look, there's no getting away from the price tag of this thing, but Ducati don't make budget bikes. They don't make cheap bikes, they make premium bikes, and premium bikes have got a premium price tag. That said, there are a lot of traditional V-twin cruisers that you could quite easily spec up to £25,000 by ticking a few boxes on the options catalogue, and before you know it, you'd be up to the price of one of these things. But you wouldn't have anywhere near the performance, the dynamic handling, the agility, or the engine performance that you get from the XDiavel or the Diavel V4. They're both right up there. In my mind, these are the absolute cream of the crop if you're looking for a performance bike in a cruiser outfit. You know, you want to ride a cruiser, but you don't want to lose out on sporty riding ability and having a dynamic bike that you can push into corners. Really, you've only got a couple of bikes that you can choose from, this and a Rocket 3, and I'm sorry to say that if you got them in a head-to-head test on the same road on the same day, this would show the Rocket 3 a clean pair of heels. And it's not so much the engine, it's probably more the electronics and that chassis. The chassis is so agile. It actually, I've had this going around in my head all day. The chassis of this thing makes it feel like a super naked in a cruiser outfit. So it's like a Street Fighter V4 in a tasseled leather jacket with leather chaps. It just feels so incredibly nice to ride, but so incredibly fast. And then you get off it and you look at it and you think, well, how the hell, how does that work? It doesn't compute in my head because cruisers like this they've got no right handling the way that this one does. So props to Ducati for that. And also props to Ducati because I love the way that they're still willing to take a punt on a bonkers bike like this. There are a lot of manufacturers that are getting more and more conservative in their bikes and their ranges, and they're pulling away from doing anything too extreme. But Ducati have got the balls to go out there and make something like this and then make it really very good and then make it sell. So, you know, you can't really knock them for that. They're doing a very, very good job. Well, listen, folks, that is enough from me. I've been towed here in Nice for the XDiavel V4 launch. And if you like that video, please don't forget to hit a like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our latest videos. And for all the latest news, reviews and motorcycle features, get yourself over to Visordown.com.